I was a comic book kid. An avid one. We're talking early to mid 90s. The peak of foil covers, trading cards, holograms, and characters dying just to come back a few issues later. But despite the stacks of long boxes I filled in those years, the Punisher wasn't really on my radar. My shelves were crowded with brooding Batman story arcs and colorful, mutant-powered X-Men team-ups. Not a lot of room for a gun-toting vigilante in a skull t-shirt who solved problems with bullets instead of banter. So, coming into the Punisher on NES, I wasn't riding a wave of childhood nostalgia. What I was expecting, however, was, well, trouble. Because there it is on the cartridge. The LJN logo. A badge of dishonor among retro gamers. The kind of logo that makes you brace for janky controls, confusing mechanics, and an adaptation that somehow misses the point entirely. But LJN working with a Marvel IP? That's a combo that at least piques curiosity. Was this going to be another licensed misfire, or a rare case where LJN delivered something halfway decent? I fired it up to find out. Before we continue, I'm going to direct you to, you know what's coming. The description. Background viewing, check it out. Let's get on to the basics. The Punisher for the NES is a rail shooter. Not literal rails, but close enough. You move forward automatically through city streets, warehouses, and enemy-infested strongholds, taking out bad guys with a supply of lead and the occasional grenade. What makes it unique is the behind-the-shoulder perspective. You see Frank Castle from the back, center screen, as you guide both his movement and aim using the D-pad. Shooting and grenades are mapped to the two-face buttons. It's a control setup that works surprisingly well, once you accept that a zapper-compatible version just wasn't gonna happen. And yes, it's an LJN game. That often means low expectations. But to its credit, this one mostly functions like a game should. The difficulty leans classic NES. Not impossible, but you'll need quick reflexes, patience, and a decent sense of ammo conservation to get anywhere. Pickups like health, ammo, armor, extra lives float by and must be shot to collect. You'll also find newspaper clippings that offer hints, some useful, some cryptic, and the occasional go arrow that opens a side path to a bonus area. Overview. In The Punisher, you're not just shooting through levels, you're bringing vigilante justice to the streets, one dead-eyed mobster at a time. As Frank Castle, you proceed into danger, gun drawn, facing wave after wave of goons, ninjas, flamethrower guys, and heavily armored mini-bosses, all while trying to dodge return fire and make out the occasional floating health kit in the chaos. The game's structure gives you a bit of freedom. Choose one of 3 available missions from the outset. Each mission has 2 or 3 stages, ending in a boss fight against something appropriately over the top. Helicopter, tank, or a classic comic book villain. It's not yet clear to me if there's a final mission beyond those 3. The game feels short if there isn't, but making it through all of them in one go, it's no small feat. In classic NES shooter fashion, everything's handled under pressure. You shoot pickups to collect them, shoot newspapers to grab tips, and sometimes shoot a go arrow to veer off into a bonus area. Those off-path zones seem to offer better item drops and lighter resistance, but that's from my observation. Not necessarily a guarantee. And while the overall feel is straightforward, walk, shoot, dodge, survive, there's enough layered in to reward good play. Finish a stage efficiently, and you'll be gifted extra ammo, more points, and sometimes even extra lives. My youthful experience. None. I never played the Punisher as a kid. I do recall seeing ads for it, probably in the manuals of other LJN games, maybe in a comic book or two. The advertising had that loud, punchy, buy this now energy, but despite all the action-packed imagery, it never really grabbed me. At the time, I had no idea LJN had a bad reputation. That realization came years later, well after my NES days were over. Back then, it was just another rainbow logo on a cartridge. And while I was definitely a comic book fan, the Punisher wasn't in my crosshairs. He was overshadowed by my steady diet of Batman and X-Men. So this one passed me by completely. No nostalgia filter here, just a clean first-time run, decades after the fact. The look. The Punisher on NES isn't exactly a feast for the eyes, but it gets the job done. The title screen and intro are actually pretty strong, like something pulled from the cover of a Punisher comic. It still looks like 8-bit artwork, of course, but it delivers a bit of theatrical flair, almost like a low-bit trailer for an MCU-style coming attraction, just done within NES limitations. Some gameplay screens manage to look surprisingly sharp, while others dissolve into a clutter of pixel noise. The environments shift enough to avoid monotony, but nothing really sticks with you as a visual standout. Frank Castle himself looks decent from the over-the-shoulder perspective, but only has a few poses. I say poses deliberately here, because it doesn't feel like animation so much as flipping between a small set of iconic stances. It gets the job done, but don't expect fluidity. Enemies are easy enough to distinguish in the heat of battle, and explosions and effects are functional, but not flashy. Bosses like helicopters and tanks add some visual variety, though they're not especially detailed. Considering how many sprites are moving around at once, flicker is fairly minimal. Better than expected for an NES title. You'll still see a little stutter when things get crowded, but it's surprisingly well managed, given the system's limitations. Sound. The audio design in The Punisher is a strange beast. There's some genuinely moody, atmospheric music at the start and end of the game. Different tunes, both of which do a decent job of setting a gritty urban tone. Boss fights also get their own musical cues, reinforcing that you've entered the "this is serious now" moment. But between those highlights, it's eerily quiet. Most of the game leaves you with little more than the sounds of gunfire. Even that's a mixed bag. Your own shot sounds solid and distinct, while enemy gunfire has its own unique audio signature, which is actually kind of helpful for gameplay, even if it doesn't sell the realism. Grenades, meanwhile, sound like someone cracking open a fizzy soda. Not exactly the thunderous boom you might expect from battlefield explosives. The silence is so pronounced that it actually becomes part of the atmosphere. It's not a flaw so much as a stylistic choice, but one that might not land for everyone. And then there's the saxophone player. Yes, at certain points, a lone jazz musician shows up mid-level, playing a cool little riff. It's a rare and oddly stylish moment. But if you shoot him, intentionally or by a twitch reflex mistake, the music doesn't stop abruptly. Instead, it dies out slowly, almost mournfully. A small detail, but a surprisingly effective one. All in all, the sound is minimalist, but not careless. You get a sense that they were trying to use silence and sharp audio cues as part of the experience. Whether it works or not depends on your expectations. Gameplay. The Punisher is a rail shooter with a twist. You don't just aim, you also dodge. The action plays out from a third-person over-the-shoulder view with Frank Castle visible in front of the crosshairs. The D-pad lets you move him left and right to avoid enemy fire and control your aim, which makes for a tense balancing act. The A and B buttons are used for shooting and throwing grenades. At first glance, you might wonder why this wasn't a Zapper game. Feels like it should be. But given the need for dual-purpose control, movement, and aiming, implementing Zapper support would have been a logistical mess, unless it was redesigned entirely for first-person view or forced players to juggle both a controller and a light gun. In that context, the choice makes more sense. There are 3 missions to choose from, each containing multiple stages. Whether there's more beyond these missions is unclear to me. As of this recording, I haven't managed to complete all 3 without a game over. But progress is rewarded. The better you do in a stage, the more goodies you receive at the end. Bonus points, extra ammo, even, sometimes, an additional life. Pickups like armor, health, and ammo are collected by shooting them, which makes sense in this genre. Another example of something video game logic accepts, but would never be effective in the real world. You'll also see newspapers hiding mid-stage that contain cryptic tips, sometimes obvious, sometimes surprisingly subtle. But taking a moment to read while dodging bullets, it's easier said than done. Ammo conservation is crucial. Run out and your shots slow to a pitiful crawl. It's not quite a game over, but it is a significant handicap. Occasionally you'll come across a flashing go arrow. Shoot it to enter a bonus world. These side areas offer a break from the main action, and while they don't always feel like true bonuses, they seem to contain fewer enemies and some more useful drops. Though that may be anecdotal based on my limited attempts. Boss fights cap off the final stage of each mission and offer a change of pace. Helicopter, tank, and one brutal thug. These add variety, and each requires a little trial and error to figure out. They're not brutally hard, but they break up the action nicely and give the gameplay a bit more personality. All told, it's classic NES shooter fare. Simple on the surface, harder than it looks, though my early impression is it's easier than the traditional NES hard, and more mechanically demanding than it seems at first glance. Whether or not you enjoy that depends largely on your appetite for on-rail shooters and how you feel about multitasking with limited controls. Other. In true Punisher fashion, the game mostly avoids moral nuance, except for one moment, that saxophone player. He's the lone, innocent bystander, and if you shoot him, not only does his street performance music fade out in a somber, almost mournful way, you take a huge chunk of damage. It's a strange, oddly artistic choice for a game like this, and one of the few moments where the game tries to tug at something resembling a conscience. It's easy to imagine a better fit for this game on the Super Nintendo. With shoulder buttons available, you could separate dodging and aiming, maybe even maintain aim lock while ducking out of the way. Of course, you'd need a claw grip or an extra thumb, but at least the hardware would support the idea more gracefully. A quirky thought, but even the Atari 7800 might have been a better fit for this game, at least visually. It could handle more simultaneous sprites without flicker, which would benefit the Punisher's onslaught of enemies and bullets. Of course, the trade-off would be audio. But the 7800's ancient sound chip might actually suit this game's long stretches of silence just fine. But don't expect it to do too much justice to those moody intro tunes or saxophone laments. The optional go arrows take you into extra areas, though calling them bonus stages might be a stretch. I've mentioned this before, but they do seem to offer better item pickups and lower enemy density. But it's not always clear whether entering one is worth the detour. Still, they break the monotony and reward exploration, however lightly. Me, myself, and sometimes you. The Punisher is strictly a one-player experience. No co-op, no versus modes, no multiplayer extras. The solitary nature fits the grim tone of Frank Castle's lone crusade against crime. Playing solo means all the pressure is on you. Aiming, dodging, and managing resources all at once. It can get pretty intense, especially as stages progress and enemy fire ramps up. For those who thrive on mastering reflexes and memorizing enemy patterns, this can be rewarding. For others, it may lean towards frustration, particularly since running out of ammo significantly hampers your ability to keep pace. There's a subtle pacing to the game that encourages you to get better. Not just survive, but excel to reap bonuses like extra ammo and lives, which can be the difference between finishing a mission or seeing a game over. While I didn't grow up with this game, playing it now feels like a decent challenge that respects the single-player format without trying to shoehorn multiplayer gimmicks. If you enjoy classic NES shooters and can handle a bit of trial and error, this solo journey might be right up your alley. Who would enjoy this? I'll be honest, this style of shooter isn't usually my thing. I'm more into the vertical and horizontal arcade-style blasters than these over-the-shoulder rail-based shoot-'em-ups. That said, the Punisher plays well enough and feels beatable enough to earn a spot on the occasional play rotation. Fans of this specific shooter subgenre will likely appreciate what's here. Die-hard Punisher fans, especially those with nostalgic for the grittier comic book era, won't have much trouble justifying the cartridge's presence in their collection. And yes, it has the infamous LJN logo, but compared to their street cred, this one's surprisingly competent. In short bursts, both in terms of session length and how often you revisit it, the Punisher can hold your attention. If you're turned off by gun-centric gameplay, fair enough. This one won't change your mind. But for nearly everyone else, it's worth at least a tryout. It's not jaw-dropping, but it delivers more quality than you might expect, based on reputation alone. Legacy. It's hard to predict the future of the Punisher, both the character and the intellectual property. On the one hand, the MCU continues to dominate pop culture, and the broader genre of superhero and vigilante justice stories still has momentum. But how permanent is that trend? Comics themselves are becoming more niche, and their cultural footprint is shrinking year by year. As for the Punisher specifically, that's a much more complicated question. Society's evolving views on gun violence and media representation make the future of a character like Frank Castle uncertain. We're in the middle of a cultural shift, potentially. And it's difficult to say whether the Punisher will someday be viewed as a relic of questionable taste or remain insulated by the "it's just fiction" defense that shields many over-the-top action icons of the past. This particular NES game, though, I don't see much of a legacy forming. It's a footnote, one remembered by a small, nostalgic group of fans, but unlikely to be rediscovered or celebrated by future generations. Once those few loyal players set down the controller for good, this cartridge may quietly fade into obscurity. Overall, The Punisher for NES isn't a great game, but it's definitely better than I expected. It's a rail shooter, which isn't a game I usually chase after. It stars a character I never really followed, and it's published by LJN, whose name alone tends to trigger a reflexive wince from retro fans. Cue that notorious chorus in your head. Thanks, Biggie. And yet, it works. Sort of. The gameplay is solid, the presentation does what it can within 8-bit limits, and the difficulty feels fair in that classic NES kind of way. It's not remarkable, and it's definitely not a hidden gem. But it's not garbage either. Not by a long shot. Even though it's not really my style, I do plan to pop this card in a few more times just to see how far I can get. That alone speaks to a level of quality I wasn't expecting. It may not blow you away, but if you give it a chance, it might just surprise you too. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you next mission.